Well, hello guys, welcome back. And today we're looking at the first episode of Loki. Episode 1, Glorious Purpose. So, there's been this thing in Star Wars recently where, I feel like they did that Disney Expo recently, same night as the Game Awards. And it was like, oh, here's 1,000 Star Wars shows, right? One after another. Ahsoka's getting her own show. Obi-Wan's getting his own show. Dexter Jester is getting his own show, right? Everyone in Star Wars is getting their own show. There's the Boba Fett show as well. That's the other big one. And I'm just kind of like, are we oversaturated on Star Wars? But now, sitting here with Loki, I'm like, are we oversaturated with Marvel? Because Loki doesn't need a show. This show doesn't need to exist. I mean, yeah, of course, out of all the shows, this is gonna have the biggest implications. This is where the craziest stuff is gonna happen, and you can see that set up in this first episode. But, did we really need a Loki show? Really? Not that I'm complaining about the actual show itself. I think this first episode is good. There's a lot of setup going on here. There's a lot of these are all setups for future things. There's a lot of catching us up because, we start off with the Battle of New York. And that means we're at Loki in 2012. We now need to get Loki caught up to where he is in 2017 or 18 at the end of Infinity War. Right? We need to get him back up to basically his death. So there's a lot of that in this episode. And it's a lot of setup because we need to know how the world works, how the TVA works, how everything's going on. So yeah, it's a lot. To that end, yeah, I would say a lot of this episode is exposition. And it probably does suffer because of that. It is good. Some of it's good. There's a lot of deep diving into who is Loki? What is he like as a character? It's definitely a slower episode, and it's definitely a setup. Now that they have everything set up, I want to see them now in the next few episodes. I don't know, is this 8 or 6? But whatever it is, I want to see them take full advantage of that next time. I want to see them go into the multiverse deal with these variants because they're hunting down this enigma. But I want to see them dealing with the variants, right? Seeing variantal timelines as things split off the path. That's what I'm more interested in. Because the TVA, for as interesting a location as it is, and we'll talk about it, I like the idea of the variant more than than actual just bureaucracy. I know I'm going through the Adventure Zone graduation right now, but spoilers, bureaucracy has to get destroyed. I don't want to just see the bureaucracy. I care about the other stuff. But I think this episode, by setting up all the bureaucracy, will give us time in future episodes to actually do something interesting, right? Play with all these different timelines and whatnot. But I guess let's get into it. We start off right where we left off in the original Avengers, but also Avengers Endgame when they time travel, right? They time travel back to get the Tesseract. They screw up. Loki is able to get the Tesseract and he's able to escape. Right, it plays out exactly like how we remember it. He escapes. We see what happens right after that. He escapes to Mongolia. I think it's Mongolia. Then the TVA show up. They capture him. I like how they do it. Yeah, Hunter B-15 hits him with the stick and he slows down and then she slaps the collar on him and drags him away. Yeah, that's pretty good. I like that. That's an interesting, right? They're playing around with time. There's a few other time jokes and we'll get to them. And they also take the Tesseract with them. They head to the Time Variance Authority, right? The people who control all of time. And we see how, right, Loki's a prisoner. We see there's a bunch of jokes early on, at the start of this episode. It's throwing a bunch of jokes at us, right? The whole loop with the collars, because in Thor Ragnarok, you had the obedience discs that shocked you if you didn't do. And then you have discs that just throw you back in time. Yeah, it's a neat variation. A fan service moment where the robot that I could not understand. I thought it was saying something, but I couldn't hear it. It burns off all his clothes. So we got that one moment of fan service. We got the next scene with Bernie Burns giving him the list of everything he's ever said. That's really funny. It was spoiled by the trailers, but that was really funny. But the next scene, however, with the robot soul detector thing, that was not in the trailers, and that was also really funny. Right? Just him like questioning, like, am I a robot? Am I not a robot? That's pretty good. So from there, he gets to a room and he's told to take a ticket. There's another guy who, like, some lawyer's kid. That's what he reminds me of. You know, the guy who goes to business school on his daddy's dime and then gets the manager job right out of college. Yeah, one of those types. He refuses to take the ticket and gets burnt to a crisp. Yeah, okay. I guess we should talk about the TVA at some point. A lot of this, like, right, we're seeing, like, he's in an elevator and he's dropping between the floors. Oh, now he's in a waiting room. He enters through a reception desk. The TVA is basically just offices, at least everything we've seen of it so far. I like it. It's definitely, it's a sort of unsettling vibe. Like, there's that meme about the back room, right? Like, oh, if you go into the back room, you'll be lost forever. And it's kind of going for that aesthetic. At least that's what it reminds me of, right? With the lighting's a big deal. It's always kind of mute, very brown lighting. Not like brown, like the extremes of like Mexico in American films, but like actual like brown, like the old light bulbs, right? And a lot of that comes from like this retro like 70s 60s theming. Like you know how in the movie Aliens all the technology on the ship is very like it looks like the 80s, but yet even nowadays it like still holds up as like being futuristic, whereas you go watch, I don't know, it's a sci-fi movie from like 15 years ago, Minority Report, and you see the technology in that and it's like, that does not hold up, right? It's like the whole scrolly computer thing. It's like, what the shit is that? And the TVA feels futuristic, but it also feels very retro, right? It's trying to like blend, like when he looks outside later and he sees the city, it looks like the future. He calls it magical. But yet when you see inside the building, or at least this one, the main one we're following, it just looks like a 70s, 60s office, right? It feels both timeless and also dated, and I think they do a really good job at that. All the computers feel old, right? And there's an analog nature to everything. Like, I don't think there's any like, not neon tubes, Nixie tubes or whatever, right? Like, I don't think there's any of those, but it's a lot of stuff like that. It feels dated, but in a way that kind of makes it feel timeless, like the first Alien, right? And I give it credit for that. I think the design, all the set design is really well done. From there, he sees a video on the screen, and it's Miss Minutes, voiced by Tara Strong, who's in everything, and one of the best. One of the best. We find out how the TVA came to be. That a long time ago, there was a multiverse war, and just like seeing all the galaxies, that's right out of a comic, right? Like, that's just how they used to be drawn back in the day. And we find out that there was a multiverse war that almost destroyed everything. Then the Timekeepers came in and created a single sacred timeline, right? The Timekeepers, I guess I would describe them as like the Fates. That's what they personally were, you know, like the Fates from Greek mythology, where they weave the strings or whatever of like every living person and they decide the fates of everything. That's kind of what the Timekeepers feel like, and we'll get back to that. I know nothing, unlike, like, I don't know that much about like Marvel and or DC cosmic stuff. And yeah, I know Eternity, the Living Tribunal. Is it either of those two things? You got me. We find out what variants are. They're people who stray off the sacred timeline, who go against what the Timekeepers' wishes are. And when they split off the timeline, they create a nexus event, which is, yeah, splitting the timeline. And if splits grow too big, they can eventually branch off into multiple paths and eventually potentially create a new multiverse that will destroy the war. There was, in WandaVision, Nexus did get brought up at one point, because Wanda and Vision are Nexus beings. And from how that was explained to me, is that what a Nexus being exists on like every point in the timeline and like every variant of the multiverse. It was something like that anyway. So yeah, of course, consistent theming. And yeah, we find out the TVA goes through, they fix people's mistakes, right? They take out any variants, bring them back to put them on trial. They have bombs that like reset the timeline to fix everything. And yeah, you stand trial for your offenses, which is weird. Like, I get like if someone like broke the timeline on purpose. Like at the end of the episode, they mentioned like, oh, what if some guy got himself a time machine and went back in time looking for oil? Right? Like that I get. But what if like the examples they give is like, hey, what if you accidentally checked out of work too early and you weren't supposed to do that and now you've created a new branch in the timeline? Like, do they just reset time and call it there, or do you get like strictly punished, even though that's not something you had like any, right? It was just like a thing that the great fates timekeepers decided wasn't good. Yeah, and this also, so there is no multiverse. And this takes us to the Avengers Endgame. It is still debated years later. Because, Avengers Endgame spends so much of its time explaining how time travel works. And everybody still disagrees on how time travel works, right? Like, I still disagree with Tim Geddes about how it works. But yeah, basically, the way I'm taking it here as how they're explaining it is that right now, the multiverse does not exist. Even though, I mean, we are eventually supposed to have a multiverse of madness. So something is going to happen in this show. But yeah, but when they went back, as the Sorcerer Supreme explained it, when they went back in time, they took the Infinity Stones out, which would theoretically create a new timeline, but because they put them back, it preserves the sacred timeline. And this will be confirmed in a second. But yeah, it does not. There are a lot of people who think that, them taking out the Infinity Stone creates new branches in the multiverse. This is confirming that no, it does not do that. So Tim Geddes is wrong, because I think that's what he said. Again, it's been a few years. Also, in here we get our title sequence, and I like because it's all the Loki, like the different variants of L, O, K, and I. And because I always like the Loki logo is that it's letters taken from the different Marvel movies. I always thought that was kind of neat. But then in our like title sequence, it flashes between like all the different like fonts. But because they're all variants, it's all like font variants of Loki. And in the show, Loki is a variant. Very clever show. Before the trial, we get Mobius. He's in France in 1549. Someone is going around killing Minutemen. Very funny show. The agents at the TVA are called Minutemen. Because they're from the Time Variance Authority. They manage the minutes. Very funny. Oh, I know I'm being sarcastic as shit right now, but it was a little funny the first time I heard it. They ask a kid for information, and the kid just he does this like weird thing with like a walking figure on a screen. Why did he do that? I don't know, but what the kid tells them is that the devil did it, right? They point at a stained glass of the devil. So Mephisto's in it once again. This is our bringing back of Mephisto. No, because she also has gum that like the time traveler or whatever, the person killing all the Minutemen had. And now I tried to read what's on the gum. I have no idea. I know better people than me have already known the Easter eggs, but just at a blank eye, it's blue gum. It's an ice giant. And because there's like a devil on the package or something, but it's a blue devil. That makes me think it's an ice giant. Which got me thinking, Marvel has never done a mystery show, or like they've never done like a movie that's like a murder mystery or whatever, have they? Because they've done because Ant-Man is a heist movie, right? They've played around with these things, but yeah, I don't think they've ever done a mystery. And this would be the perfect setup to do a mystery, but we'll talk about it when the episode ends. We go back to Loki, and we see that he goes before the judge. They call him... So, I'm pretty sure previously in the MCU, they call him Loki Odinson, right? Like Thor Odinson. But in this, it's Loki Laufeyson? Because I do not remember my Norse mythology. But I'm saying I don't remember it. Because in my memory, Laufey is Loki's mother. But yeah, for some reason in my memory, Laufey is Loki's mother. And he does have a father. I just don't remember who it is. But yeah, for some reason, that's where I don't know. Again, I don't remember my mythology, so who knows? But yeah, he says that he's not guilty. He blames the Avengers because they're the one who went back in time. They're the one who did the time traveling. And the judge says, no, this isn't the Avengers' fault. The Avengers were supposed to time travel. As part of the sacred timeline, the Avengers were supposed to go back in time. They were supposed to do this, right? Everything played out, but they were supposed to get the Tesseract, and now they didn't. So this is just a blanket cover for, right, everything that happens in Endgame. The Avengers traveling back, Thanos traveling forwards. That's all covered in this. And I'm assuming, because I saw, of course, it's been about a day since the episode aired, and I've seen people on Twitter say, well, hey, why isn't Steve Rogers traveling back in time at the end of the Endgame? Why isn't that make him a variant? Why does Gamora coming back or coming to the future with Thanos and then staying, because she's still alive at the end of Endgame. There's a deleted scene with her where she walks off in it. Yeah, why doesn't that make Gamora a variant? And the simple answer is that was part of the sacred timeline. That those two things were supposed to happen. Steve is supposed to go back and get with Peggy. Gamora is supposed to travel forwards, and yeah. And of course, the whole time travel mess at the end where he snaps Thanos and Thanos turns into dust. Like, does that restore the timeline? What? Time travel in Endgame, they spend so much of that movie trying to explain it. It makes no fucking sense. Don't worry about it. I was scrolling through Twitter and someone posted like a Grant Morrison quote about how, like, oh, when you're a kid, you just accept, right, that stupid things happen. But as adults, you start to question, like, hey, how can Superman fly? How does Spider-Man be sticky? They're just stupid fucking stories for kids. That's kind of what I feel like right now. It's a stupid fucking story for kids. The time travel in Endgame does make no sense. And from this, the judge says that the timekeepers dictate the flow of time. She then dictates their dictation of the flow of time to try to make sure it works. And yeah, that goes back to the thing I was saying earlier about the timekeepers basically being the Fates. Or I know there's a Norse version of the Fates as well. I don't remember what they're called. But yeah, they also dictate, they live under Yggdrasil and they dictate the lives of men and mortals alike or whatever. So the timekeepers they control all the flow of time. They say what happens. If they say that, hey, this thing happens, then it happens. It's establishing the conflict of the episode, and we'll get back to it. And then, yeah, Loki also finds out there is no magic at the TVA, right? Because he tries to break free with his magic and it just straight up doesn't work. From there, he gets taken by Agent Mobius, which, Mobius strip. There's a lot of time jokes in here. Not bad. I think they're all pretty decent. There's one joke, and we'll get to it, that I don't know how to feel about. I have very complicated feelings on. He goes around the TVA. Mobius is played by Owen Wilson, who is an actor I'm hit and miss on. Sometimes he's good, sometimes he's bad. And I think he does a really good job in this. All the actors and actresses do. This is where we see the outside of the TVA, and Loki's like, oh, it looks like magic, but there is no magic here. It's just beautiful. My question is, because the TVA, does it exist outside of time? Is it like a monitor thing? Does it exist in like its own like weird like dimension thing where it can then go in and absorb all of time? Why aren't there more aliens in the TVA, right? If it dictates the flow of time in every world. I know it's a TV show budget, but hey, Star Trek was able to get away with a lot. Mobius starts to like basically interview Loki. He's playing him in the end. Mobius knows exactly what he wants to get. He knows exactly how the situation is going to go. He is playing him the entire time. Right from the beginning, he knows exactly where he wants to get him, and it's just a matter of getting him there. Because he asks, right, what if he goes back? And Loki's like, oh, I'm going to go back. I'm going to take over Earth. I'm going to take over Asgard. All the 9 realms, become king of space, right? Oh, king of space. And then Loki's like, oh, the big problem is the lie of freedom, right? That when it comes to making a choice, people will always take the wrong path. Of course, the irony is that Loki himself, throughout this entire episode, is realizing that he's not free. That everything he has done up to this point and everything he will do after this point in the timeline, he believes that he is exempt from the free will, but of course he isn't, right? It's the theme of the episode, because I guess I was going to save this for a little bit later, but I might as well just say it now. The timekeepers are the fates, right? They decide exactly how the sacred timeline goes. And Loki is like, oh, well, I want to be free, right? I'm exempt. I know true freedom, and everybody else will kneel to me. But because the timekeepers exist, they are a greater power. He, throughout the course of this episode, realizes that no, he isn't free, and he does not have free will because everything is predestined. Everything in his life has been predestined by the timekeepers. They know how his life starts and they know how his life ends. And that's this entire thing. Because, right, we see some earlier moments in his life, right? Mobius calls out how he loses all the time, but that he is like an interesting person, right? The god of mischief. Isn't that interesting? It's kind of meta in a way, because it's like how we as the fans like Loki. Mobius is kind of a stand-in for that he is also like he sees the villain's perspective and he's like, I get it. You're not a bad person. And of course, we know Loki isn't a bad person because everything that happens in Ragnarok and the beginning of Infinity War. But yeah, it's this entire thing with Mobius is a deconstruction of Loki's character, right? He's like, oh, Loki, you're the god of mischief, but when it comes to your mischief, you're pretty lame, right? Your mischief is tame. You just enjoy hurting people. It's your illusion of freedom, right? You're just controlling people. And okay, admittedly, some of that comes later, but yeah. We also get the DB Cooper thing. When I saw the DB Cooper thing in the trailer, I was like, that might be fun, right? If they're messing around with like the timeline, maybe he's going to have to go back in the timeline and become DB Cooper. Wouldn't that be a fun episode? Or like a fun moment in an episode? Yeah, that's not what we get here. It's just a quick like scene. Like, I do wonder, like, how did this come about? Did they want to have a DB Cooper scene in the show, but they like couldn't figure out a way to write it in, but they still really liked the idea because Tom Hiddleston does look like DB Cooper. And they were like, oh, well, you know what? Let's just do the scene anyways, and we'll find a place to put it in somewheres. So they put it in here. Because, yeah, that's what it feels like. It feels like it's a good idea, but it's kind of like that stupid pancake joke from the second Wreck-It Ralph, where it's like, that's kind of a funny joke, but there's no real place to put it in the movie, so it's just shoved at the very end. That kind of feels like the DB Cooper thing here, where it's like, that's a funny joke, but they didn't have a place for it, so they just shoved it right here in this scene because they needed it somewhere. It's, he lost a bet to Thor. That's the whole reason he did it. What bet did he lose? I don't know. Yeah, it's a neat idea, but it's a really quick scene, and maybe I would have liked more of it. Maybe I would have liked it to have like a greater purpose other than a bit of backstory. But whatever. Loki's whole thing, right? Like I was saying, he claims his choices are his own, that he can do what he wants. And does Loki have free will? That's the big thing. Is everything been predestined? Especially because we've been focusing on his past. We then go into his future, and we get the theme from Thor Dark World where he indirectly, I mean, he doesn't mean to, but it still happens. He causes his mother's death, right? Which, Thor the Dark World sucks. I don't know if it's the worst MCU movie, but it's definitely in the bottom two because it sets up the Infinity Stones, basically. That's the one where we find out the Tesseract and Loki's Scepter are Infinity Stones. It does a lot. And because of that, it keeps getting brought up in these movies. It was in Endgame, and admittedly, it was really good in Endgame. And using it here again, even though it's one of the worst Marvel movies, they have been able to use it really well in these future things. Because yeah, seeing Loki's mother die, and we'll get the scene again later with him crying, seeing it, right, that it's kind of his fault. And it's like, no, this is really good because Loki is the one good part of Thor the Dark World. Just straight up, it's the one good. And I mean, I guess the mother as well. But there's a lot of bullshit in Thor the Dark World. Thor the Dark World sucks. Morbius calls him out that, hey, he was born to cause pain, suffering, and death. Which, I guess. Again, we also know what happens in the future, that he does, specifically in Ragnarok in the beginning of Infinity War. And then eventually Loki is able to, right, Mobius gets distracted for a minute, Loki's able to steal the controller, and he's able to escape. There's a quick scene where we see someone being brought into the TVA, and people are like, is that Peggy Carter? And it kind of looks like her. I'm not gonna say anything because it might just, like, it'd be neat to like see some other like MCU like B characters get like brought in the background occasionally when we're at the TVA. Like, that'd be like a funny thing. And then he goes around because he's wanting to get the Tesseract back, and he meets Casey the intern. It took me a second to place where I recognize the actor. It's Pillboy from Best Show of All Time, The Good Place. Yep, that's where I recognize him from. He's great in The Good Place, and he's great here. Just a fun little scene, right, where it's like, oh, Loki says, I'm gonna gut you like a fish. He doesn't know what a fish is. That's kind of funny. I mean, this episode, because it's a lot of exposition, right? It's a lot of setup. So you need the jokes to be solid. And yeah, I think Casey in this moment is really funny. But then Loki wants the Tesseract, so he opens up the cart, and there's just a bunch of Infinity Stones. And Casey's like, oh, we use them as paperweights around here. In the moment, I was like, yeah, that scene's really funny, right? Like him just opening up the drawer and finding out that, hey, Infinity Stones just aren't that special here. That's funny. Actually thinking about it for a second, I don't know if I like it that much. You know, it's kind of like, way back in the Rick and Morty reviews, I mentioned that once you find out there's like a multiverse, there's infinite Ricks and infinite Mortys. In that episode, it's like, it just kind of makes Rick and Morty feel less special. It's not a terrible thing, but it's like, it kind of takes away some of the weight of it. And that's definitely what it feels like here. Because, right, in Endgame and Infinity War, Vision, Gamora, and Natasha all die to get the Infinity Stones. And now here, hey, these are just, right, they're so common, we use them as paperweights. It takes away some of that stakes. I don't think it ruins anything, because there is also this thing that, part of it is because I know from the comics, Infinity Stones only work in the dimension they're from, right? So like, let's say someone stole, I don't know, the Time Stone and tried to create a new branch in the multiverse, and the TVA stopped them. The Time Stone from that one would then be in its own reality, and it would now be less useful, right? Like, it would create a new branch. It basically, the Time Stone that was stolen would be a new branch in the multiverse, and it wouldn't work on the original branch anymore. That's at least how it works in the comics. Like when Darkseid gets the Infinity Gauntlet, and he can't use it because the Infinity Stones don't work in the DC universe. And that's how I'm just gonna pretend it works with like that on the MCU. Of course, does it make any sense then that the Infinity Stones that they go back in the past and bring back into the future still work? I mean, I guess it justifies it because it's still on the sacred timeline, and as long as they don't stray from the sacred timeline, everything's fine. But I don't know. It's a funny joke in the moment, but I don't really know how I feel about it. And then, of course, Loki realizes that, right, Infinity Stones are nothing here. So that means the TVA is the greatest power in the universe, right? That above all else, the TVA is, right, all powerful. It controls the flow of time, after all, more than a time Infinity Stone does. But the bigger takeaway is that, at least I get, and that I'm pretty sure he gets by the end of the episode as well, is that no matter what Loki does, right, back in his life, everything was predestined. He was, right, he was born, he was going to play his role, he was going to make the Avengers into the Avengers, he was going to become a hero for a little bit, and then he was going to die. Which is what he finds out in the next scene. Because as they're playing through his tape, I'm just like, I'm waiting for him to find out that he dies. Okay, that came out worse than I meant it to sound. But right, like, that's a scene, like, seeing your own death. Ooh, that's gotta mean a lot. And it's a great scene coming right here, where, right, he goes forward in the tape. He sees his mother's death. He sees his father's death and how his father still loves him. Then he sees how much his brother loves him. You get that little smile on his face. Tom Hiddleston's a great actor. He does great in this moment. And then he sees his own death, and that's where the tape ends. Like, as far as knows, Thor also dies in this moment. Like, the tape ends after the ship blows up. As far as he knows, Thor is also dead in the sacred time, the timeline. But it comes to the thing that Loki's life up to this point, because he's been in all the movies and he's now dead, is predetermined. But he claims to want freedom, right? That he knows freedom is a lie. So now at the TVA, beyond the borders of time, he is now given the chance at freedom, right? Outside of the predestined timeline, the sacred timeline, only now can he gain true freedom, right? Because the TVA is the most powerful force in the universe or whatever. That's at least how I'm interpreting it. And even though he never says that, that's the conclusion, right, that hopefully he gets by the end of the episode. At least that's the one I think he takes, is that, right, he realizes that the TVA is powerful, and he wants that power because that power can give him the free will he so desires. After the scene, right, where he sees his own death and everything, he fights the Hunter B-15, and it shows off that mischievous side where he, like, straps the collar around her and just keeps, like, splicing her back and forth, like, jamming her up, right? Like, I would say it's making her dizzy, but you don't really get that. But that's kind of neat. Right? It's just using time combat. I don't know. It shows off his mischievous side. And then Mobius comes back in, and Loki just straight up admits the truth. That he doesn't enjoy hurting people. That he's basically been acting as a villain for control. Again, that's the conclusion more the episode gets to. Because like I said at the beginning, a lot of this episode is catching Loki up to where he was at the end of, or at the beginning of Infinity War when he dies. Right? Because Loki was a hero, right? For that one moment, he was an Avenger, and then he died. So now while he's still not the Loki we knew at the end of Infinity War, he is caught up. He knows what's going to happen. He knows that him and his brother can get along, that he can be the hero of Asgard. But there's still that fact that he's still the Loki of the past. So if he wants to betray the Timekeepers by the end of the show and try to take over the multiverse, Doctor Doom style, like when he took out the Beyonder. If he wants to do that by the end of this show, because he's still technically the Loki of the past, he can totally do that, and then in the process he accidentally creates the multiverse. I'm just saying, that's totally where this series can go. Either way, no matter what, it's gonna end with him creating the multiverse. And then Mobius reveals that the reason he wants Loki's help is because the killer, right, the devil, is Loki. So that mystery that potentially could have been building up, well, there's your answer. Again, I think as of this moment, I think that's a little too black and white. Right? And I know I pointed out the ice giant gum thing, and I'll point out something here in a second that does lean towards Loki. But I think that's just a little too black and white. But definitely something is going to happen. I don't know. I hope they go something interesting with it. But I like the setup. I like that now Loki's trying to hunt himself, that he's working with Mobius, he's working with the TVA. And of course they don't trust him, right? B-15 obviously doesn't trust him and wants him decommissioned immediately. But I see it. I see where the potential is here, and I like the setup so far. And we get one last scene, Oklahoma, 1858. This is where we get the thing about, right, going back for oil. And they burn the cloaked figure burns the Minutemen and steals their reset charges. So they're stealing the bombs for something. Now, again, I don't know my Norse mythology, but isn't Loki a god of fire? Like, I know in the MCU he's an ice giant. But isn't Loki in actual mythology a god of fire? Because I know he's not. Because Loki in mythology is not the son of Odin. Isn't he actually Odin's blood brother? And isn't he? I swear he's a god of fire. Because that's Ragnarok, right? Loki breaks free in Ragnarok and then burns down something or something like that. I don't remember. Again, I don't know my Norse mythology. So that may be another hint at it, that, hey, Loki's the god of fire, and maybe they'll play into that with this. Wouldn't that be interesting? Again, they have the Laufeyson thing earlier. But yeah, and that's where the episode ends, and I think it's fine. I'd say it's maybe a little better than fine. Maybe it's good. It's a lot of setup. It's a lot to get through. We gotta have explanations for how all this time travel works. Again, much like how Endgame spent a lot of its runtime. I'm not gonna say poorly explaining the time travel, but just trying to justify how their time travel works. Endgame spends a lot of time. This episode spends a lot of time explaining how the multiverse works and getting us caught up to getting this 2012 Loki caught up to 2018 Loki. And to that end, it is very effective at its job. I don't think it ever like breaks the rules of like show don't tell, or it like it never goes too far in my opinion anyways. Because you need a little bit. And I think like as Loki goes, I think his character progression, from wanting to take over the earth, where he ends off in the original Avengers still, wanting to rule the 9 realms, to now him realizing that, hey, there's a chance for me to actually be free to do something more interesting here, and to finally get what I truly desire, because maybe I don't like hurting people. I think that's good character development that was all done in a single circle. So to that end, yes, the episode is successful. I'm more interested to see where it goes from here. I definitely want to see more places and see the different variants of like time, because they're clearly not exploring like a multiverse. But I want to see like more of this variant stuff. I think that's the more interesting things, like the potential here for like breaks in the timeline and him solving time crime. That sounds fun, and yeah, I'm interested in that. I'm less interested in the bureaucracy of everything. And right now, again, the entire episode more or less takes place in the office building. Hopefully they'll move on, and yeah, hopefully it'll be great from here. Yeah, episodes are now on Wednesdays, which are weird. Because again, I don't remember if there's 6 or 8 episodes, but I know either way, Black Widow is out by the time this show ends, and because that's early July. Yeah, we'll just have to see where it goes from here. So for now, I hope you all enjoyed. Stay tuned for more. Until next time, peace.